Please unmute it. It's nice.
Okay. Uh, See, if you look at these graphs, it tells you lot many things. For example, uh, this curve here is the working age population in this country, and as it is growing over the years. And there is a terminology which is often used, the demographic dividend. What it means is that when the working age population is more than the dependent population, the country should harvest economic benefits. There are so many working hands, and therefore the productivity will increase. And this has been shown by several countries, particularly the East Asian countries. As an example, you can see here the graph for China. In 2010, China had the maximum, this is about 68% of the population was in the working group. And therefore, from 2010, we have seen how rapid strides in economics that China has. In India, this working age population has been growing. And it's supposed this demographic dividend period is supposed to last till 2058. There is a very interesting saying by one Chinese. He said, the Americans became rich when they were young. We became rich when we were old. Are we Indians going to say that we became old, but we never became rich? So this is the situation that we need to address. This is a projected with the median variation. Okay. Now this demographic dividend period is until going to be in 2058. So we can say maybe 38 more years. What can we do? Now here at the bottom I have written an elusive demographic dividend. The reason for this will be clear from this particular data. The youth unemployment rate figures are given here. In 2000, the youth unemployment rate was 17.83%. Today it is somewhere around 24%. That we know that the younger generation is finding it very difficult. Well, some officials will say that, well, this is not 24%. Today it is 40%. There are several politicians who will also make this. So this is the situation wherein that on one hand the working population is growing, but that working population does not have work. And therefore the situation we describe that is this demographic dividend here is going to be elusive. Are we not going to achieve this? The second important thing that we also need to understand is the ground realities of Indian economy. What is plotted here is GDP versus years, and it is said that this is a report of Niti Asia in 2017. So by 2026, we will be about 5 trillion economy, and we will take over Japan. Currently, it is something like 2.7 trillion, and therefore, the question that again we need to ask is that if this plot is right, then in the next 3 years, how are we going to double the GDP? These are the very important issues, and they're all connected to science and technology. At the same time, we need to also understand that the difference between the GDP of USA and us, or China or us. So, what is that we should be doing as a research community? Now, if India is going to be $5 trillion economy, that's not sufficient indicator of economic prosperity. And therefore, I'll bring one more plot to you. This plot was drawn sometime in 2013 when India's per capita GDP was 1,505. That is total GDP divided by the population. That gives you the per capita. It was 1,505. China's GDP that time was 2,747. Brazil was 11,313. United States was 15,000. Now this plot assumes two things. That the Indian economy grows at 8% per annum and other economies don't grow at all. They remain stagnant at 2014 value. If that are the assumptions, then how many years are we going to take to catch up with the large economies in the world? So this plot says that if we start from 2014 and China remains stagnant at 2014 per capita GDP is going to take us 20 years. If Brazil does not grow at all, remains stagnant at 2014 value, then it will take us 27 years. And if you take the extreme example, if you want to catch up with the US, then it's going to, and US does not grow, then it will take us 47 years. So I have been asking in the universities and in institutes, the young people sitting at the back benches, are you going to wait for 47 years? Maybe 47 years, there's an economist who has said, in the long run, every one of us is dead. So there is no point in thinking about what will happen after 40 years. So now that points out to two things. 8% is certainly a respectable growth rate, but with that growth rate, we cannot really catch up. That means this needs to be 10%, 12%. How are we going to do that? That's another question that the research in science and research technology community should be asking. And thirdly, since these are figures of 2013, you want to know what has happened in 2020. India's GDP has become 1,877. China's GDP, which was 6,747, has become 8,000 and odd others. And US GDP, which we had assumed that it will stay stationary at 53,000, is now 63,000. And another thing, those who are reading the newspapers very objectively, they would find that when India's GDP became 1,877, there was a lot of discussion in the newspaper. Because in the same year, Bangladesh GDP crossed 2,000. So they have overtaken us. So is that acceptable now? This is a question that we ask. So in this lecture, we're going to ask questions and questions. Now, this is the last slide on economics. It's an integral part of science and technology. If you take the sectorial contribution of Indian economy, then largely it is services-oriented economy, about 50% services, manufacturing is 18%, agriculture is 16%, and manufacturing services for 13%. This includes gas, oil, water, and all these supporting systems. But this table is more important. In India, the manufacturing is 18% of the GDP, whereas our contribution to the world manufacture is 1.8%. And for China, the manufacturing is 34% of GDP, and it contributes 13.7% to the world manufacturing. So you can see that everywhere, why do you see the Chinese products? The answer is here. And for last 10 years, when I say 10 years, right from the previous science and technology policy where I was involved in some way or the other until this policy, there has been always a statement made that our manufacturing, can it be 25% of the GDP? The last 10 years, we have been asking these questions, but nothing much. It has remained stagnated at 18%. And the most important thing is that this statement, I am making it here, but I will make it clear later. The Indian economy has become capital-intensive economy, and therefore its ability to generate jobs is weakening day by day. And that is what is now reflected in the social media, that people don't have jobs. There are no government jobs, there are no jobs in the private sector. And this particular thing has happened for a variety of reasons, why it has become capital-intensive economy, and how can we change that? So that's another question that I have. Now, if we sit in air-conditioned room and then we start asking these questions, what do we do for this? Then all of us will come to the same conclusion. That conclusion is we should have appropriate education, we should have appropriate science, technology, we should foster innovations, we create new knowledge, technologies, applications. We should have newer skill developments and creating newer avenues of employment. This is all what we discuss. What is the way out? That is what we need to discuss more intensely. And when we say like this is exactly where we are asking for the convergence of science, education, and society. We're talking nothing else but this, that we should have the education, science, technology, we should converge in a manner that the economic benefits reach one and all. Now, if you ask the question that why have you asked this particular question, that why do we need to work on the convergence? The reason is this question will not be asked in the United States. It will not be asked in UK. It will not be asked in France. All those countries which have become industrially advanced much before us, anyway the convergence has taken. In our case, what has happened is that the initial trajectories of education, science, and work and jobs, they have been very different. And somehow, those very different trajectories, we want to make them converge. So this is nothing to do with you or me or anybody sitting in a university, but that has to do with the history of education, science, and work in this. And that is where we need to understand how we can arrive at a concept, to understand the dynamics of the history. But remember, history is an opaque object. What you see is what comes out of it, but you don't get a script. And that script has to be deciphered. So my attempt here is to decipher that script and present to you a case. Now, let me begin with something very pleasant and something which is very unpleasant. This particular figure shows the history of Indian GDP. And this is from Agus Madison Economic History 2003. And of course, he has given it for all the countries, which is China, Europe, and so on and so forth. But I have taken out only the plot corresponding to India. And what it says is that in the year 1 up to about 1700, India was contributing something like 25 to 30% of the world's GDP. And that is the time the India was a rich country. It was a very flourishing country that had a flourishing threads with the people, societies around us. However, this GDP contribution started decreasing, and that is the British period. And what happened in the British period was the deindustrialization of India. See, until this period, you can read Ancient Indian Commerce by Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, excellent work on this, because there are several other authors that have pointed out that before British came, India was an entrepreneurial country. Each household, yeah.
Sir, can I ask a question? Seems from the slope of the curve that it was same from the year 1 to 1600.
Yes.
And also during it. So how come is the thesis that this
See, first thing is, I have traced this curve, okay? That plot had several curves.
Yeah, of course, this 1,000 is content.
Yes.
But if you look
now, this is a time, particularly the invasions on India started around 3rd and 4th century, and that is the destabilization of social peace. But however, during this period, the Buddhists took technology from India to China, when the brass making technology was transferred to China, and from there the export started. So around that time, the Chinese GDP also started increasing. So our share dropped. But the most important thing here is, if you remember Plassey's battle, that time the Bengal's GDP was an order of magnitude more than British GDP. You should realize the numbers that we were talking about. However, during this period, about 200 years, the India was seen as a marketplace for the goods manufactured in Europe and particularly in England. And therefore, the local skills, local industries, local production had to be destroyed. And that was systematically done. And this is a term which the economists use is the deindustrialization. Every society wants to industrialize, but this year just the reverse. And there is a beautiful article, Explorations in Economic History in 2008, deindustrialization in 18 and 19 to India, Mughal decline, climate shocks, the British. And this is what every one of us must read, that how this deindustrialization. Now, during this deindustrialization,
can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Since you have explained very nicely the fall and why is the fall and etc. So can you also explain why is this hump?
Oh, there is a hump there.
Yeah.
That was the period when there is named Zawar in Rajasthan. They established industrial scale mining of zinc, which happened during the Mansingh period, and that was the only place industrially you could extract zinc, and that was exported. And this has been also recorded in the Akbar's records. Akbar asked, which is the commodity which is giving us the largest export, largest foreign exchange in the today's sense. And then it was told it is zinc, which is important. So there were certain things associated. Fine. Now, at this particular point, what we see is that the local skills, local knowledge, the local professions, as we say, they were all destroyed. Now, what are they replaced with? That's the question. So the work, which was this country was under, every house was producing something or the other. You probably may recollect what the Dhaka, where the Malmal was being produced. Very similar thing that happened across the country. So, if you destroy local skills and entrepreneurial spirits, in 200 years, what would happen? And what was that replaced with? That is what we ask the question. In the British Raj, what was the trajectory of education and work? Now, at the bottom, I have written a quotation by Charles Grant, quotation in inverted quotes. Once English knowledge was imparted to the Asiatics, their faculty of reasoning would be restored and they would rise to the scale of human beings. So let's not be very romantic about it. The principal objective of introducing English education in the country was for the moral and mental development of natives. British thought that we are uncivilized people, and the uncivilized people will have to make civilized. So you teach these natives your language, your history, and your thing, and they will become civilized. Now, you may find that the vestiges of this particular education you see even today. When I finished my PhD, I went for my postdoc to United States, and in the meetings, I used to sit with folded hands. This is what was told to us by teachers: to fold your hands. So after a couple of days, my professor asked me, "Why do you fold your hands? None of us do that." I said, "This is the way we have been trained in our schools." And then you know what he said? Well, this is more like how the white man would teach in the black schools. Those children are asked to fold hands, and your masters were doing exactly like this. Folding hand means that you will not pinch anybody, or you are so uncivilized, so your hands must be tied. Sorry, I mean, you're doing that, but that has gone into our psychology. That's one part. So the objective was moral and mental development of the natives. And 1835, the English Education Act, through which the English education started in the country, or for that matter, post dispatch 1854, we paved the way for Calcutta University, Mumbai, Bombay University, University. The objective was exactly the same. That is, firstly, to do the moral and mental improvement of natives. And second one, this vast empire required labor to run. You required clerks, you required school teachers, you required munsifs, that was the word used for stuff. Yes. And these were the factories to produce these clerks, munsifs, and the primary teachers. The hallmark of this education was there was no skill component. It was an education without skill, because it was only that you learn the English language and learn something here and there, so that your moral and mental improvement happens. And there was too much of emphasis on literature and humanity. So you do BA in history or some languages and all that. I was reading the history of Indian universities. When the British started sending the vice chancellors to the various universities, they did not send any scientists. They were all lawyers, or they're poets, or people from the literature. The British did not encourage science education. And this thing has continued even today. See, if you take the compilation of higher education registrations, you'll find that in 2018-19, throughout India, there were 99 lakh students registered for BA, whereas about 45 lakhs registered for science. So you can see that still we are continuing with that sort of a mindset, and no one has made any efforts to change that mindset. Second important thing is, none of that education that is delivered has any skill. And today when we say that, oh, skill is one of the 21st century attribute, has to be there, we don't have it. So no skill and emphasis on literature and humanity. This is not to say that the British did not start technical education. They did. But that technical education was entirely with the imperial interest. For example, we start talking about the Roorkee Engineering College established in 1848. What primary motive for establishing that college was to produce assistant, sub-assistant engineers and overseers, the subordinate class of engineers who would materially aid Europe. Also, the medical education started in Calcutta and Mumbai. However, the aim was medical assistance. There is a clear commentary which is given that the European doctors, when they visit Calcutta or Bombay, they are on the higher side of the age, and therefore they cannot learn the local language, and therefore they would need some assistance. And for that, these medical colleges were established. The survey schools, of course, the vast empire required surveys. Some survey schools also started. So this is the sum total of education that was in the British period. But remember one thing, this particular scheme of things has given rise to this equation. That is, education is equal to government job. So all that entrepreneurial country, what we used to talk about, got into the mindset that you take education and get a government job. And after independence, we really did not try to change that mindset. This should have been the job of the teachers from primary school to the universities, but we never did that. And this education was a skill-less education. That's also one issue. I will qualify when I say what I mean by the skills little later. Now, this was one tragedy, the education and job at this tragedy. Now, the science had its own tragedy. Uh, this is the period, so let's take the period 1888 to 1945, which is taken as the nationalistic phase of Indian science. Why 1888? This is the year Jagdish Chandra Bose started his experiments in presidency. Now, here, the science and education was taken as a part of the freedom. See, Mahendralal Sarkar or whatever names you talk about, they realized that the British government is not interested in giving us science education, and therefore we will start our own institutes, we'll start our own science education. And why it became a part of the freedom movement? Earlier slide, you have seen that the British used to think that we are of the inferior race, and therefore the younger people in the society wanted to prove to the British masters that if we are not better than, but at least as good as you are in the intellectual pursuits. And that is where the strong scientific movement started in India. And any name that you take today belongs to that era. Whether it's J.C. Bose, S.N. Bose, C.V. Raman, A.P.C. Meghnad Saha, talk about they're all from that nationalistic phase of science. Now, this is something which we appreciate, we worship these people, and all these people have inspired us. Even after independence, we get inspired by this. However, if you are an objective student of history, you should also understand what has it led. But before that, I should also make it that the first recorded discovery by an Indian was in 1867. And this guy in the Madras presidency, Chintamani Raghunatchari, he discovered variable star orbit. Coming back to the point, why the science flourished as a part of the national freedom movement, and how do we decipher it? Here are some lines from P.C. Ray's, like when he wrote a letter to wife of freedom fighter Chittaranjan Das when he was in prison. Can I assure you, however, dear sister, that in serving my favorite science, I have only one idea in mind, namely that through her, I should serve my country. Our aspirations are same. God knows I have no other objectives. So this was clearly tied up with the nationalistic movement. The flip side of this was here that science being made part of the freedom movement, the objective of this doing science was only intellectual. Oh, we wanted to prove that intellectually we are better than British or as good as British. And this particular science or technology became a pure intellectual exercise rather than a means towards production of wealth. This is what something got embedded in our minds, that even today, by doing science, we want to prove to the other people, the Americans, maybe Chinese, or maybe, that we are good. Well, that era has gone. Can we use science for production of wealth? This thought never got into the Indian science and technology. This is very unfortunate that it happened, because by that time, 1888, 1945, the way the Britain and France, and particularly Germany, they were making inroads into the using science and technology for production of wealth. So this is something we missed out. The science became a platonic affair, that we'll do something and prove that we are better than other people. So this is the flip side of the whole game. Now, let's start talking about what happened after it. And this is the period taking 1945 to 1992. 1945 was establishment of the DFR. And this particular phase is called the nation building phase. India was to become independent, and therefore it has to be built. And that reflection we can see from Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha's letter to Tata Trust in 1944. And what he said is it is absolutely in the interest of India to have a rigorous school of research in fundamental physics. For such a school forms the spearhead of research not only in less advanced branches of physics, but also in problems of immediate practical applications. The intentions were absolutely clear that it's not only for sciences, but also to help the industry. And then he says, moreover, when the nuclear energy has been successfully applied for power production, in say a couple of decades from now, India will not have to look abroad for its experts, but will find them ready at hand. So this was part of that nation building, and this nation building theme, it appealed to the young generation again. And therefore, those days, people wanted to do science because through science they can build the nation. You can see that science and technology became an integral part of the nation building, and you see here other set of names in this particular period: Homi Jahangir Bhabha, Vikram Sarabhai. However, this phase, 1945 to 1992, it was primarily for establishing new institutes for science, technology, education. There was large emphasis on creating scientific and technological manpower, and which can be then used for development of the country. So this was the objective which this phase. And certainly, creating technological manpower, scientific manpower, creating newer institutes, establishing the infrastructure. The quality of science that we did in this particular era was inferior to what was done earlier. So you can see the nationalistic phase, we have basic course, recent course, and all that very fundamental contributions. However, so that time we used to think that we are number one in the world in some sense. We got also Nobel Prize to C.V. Raman. Here, we did fairly well, but our number, whatever you do, used to come out to be 6. If you do explosion, you became 6th country in the world. You send Rohini in the skies, you become 6th country in the world. You send a ship to Antarctica, our number again comes up to 6. Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positions were all fixed. America, Russia, China, France, and England. So we always do this 6. But fair enough. I mean, for building this nation, some price will have to be paid, and that generation paid that price. Now,
sir, I have one quick clarification. Sir, within that time period, 2 STIP was made. One
yes.
19.
I think one of the days I'll come to you and I'll explain. Yes, I know there were
58 and one.
Yeah.
1957
and 86.
83. Sir.
Yes. 83.
So
they did not touch upon it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And
that's another interesting issue. Why we missed out? So I have come up to 1992, and well, let me. I also tried to catch. Okay. 1992. We'll continue the story after 1992 little later. But we need to also understand what was happening on the world scenario from 1945 to 1990. As I'm saying that the English education and its connectivity with the job, the education is equal to job, that equation was set in the country, and it also, that was continued even after independence. The science, the trajectory was more like an intellectual expression of the nation rather than a means to generate wealth. It also got continued. So these trajectories were diametrically opposite. We need to discuss what happened after 1992, but let's see what happened in science and education internationally during this period 45 years. In 1945, the end of the Second World War, immediately the Cold War started. And the Cold War fallout was seen primarily on science and education. In education, the people in the United States felt that the schools and colleges and universities in the United States are not providing that challenging education. And therefore, America will not be able to maintain edge as a center of scientific research in the post-World War. And therefore, they started with the education reforms. Now, what were the education reforms? The education reform was that you load the students with lots of science, the facts, methods, theories, concepts, principles, and top it up with the laboratory skills. So this is what is the training that you give to the students from primary to college. And the purpose of this particular education was to produce future scientists. And why future scientists? That also will come little later. So this whole entire purpose of science education turned out to be generate a very complicated syllabus with the facts, concepts, laboratory skills, focus only on the content of science, at the syllabus of science and nothing else. And the objective is to produce future scientists. This we call today as the one-dimensional focus on science education. It's a one-dimensional focus. And this one-dimensional focus gelled extremely well with the one-dimension focus that Americans had for the technology development. And many of you might have read this particular work. This is Science, the Endless Frontier, the report to the President, written by Vannevar Bush in 1995. And this particular report says that America should spend all the money, most of the money, or whatever it can afford in basic research, because basic research will end up in technology. The one-dimensional approach that way. Now, I have brought to you some statements of this report. The progress in war against disease depends upon flow of scientific knowledge. New products, new industry, and more jobs require continuous addition to knowledge of the laws of nature and the application of that knowledge to the practical purposes. Similarly, our defense against aggression demands new technologies so that we can develop new weapons. This essential new knowledge can be obtained only through basic scientific research. So the proposal here was that you start doing scientific research and you can cover as many areas as you want, and finally you end up. So the both education and science both had just one dimensional approach. However, the philosophers and educationists attacked that first point, that is the education. And they said content of science is not good enough in science education. It is required, but it is not. It is not the sole criteria. And you can see that John Davy, the great philosophers of the modern time, in his book The Child and the Curriculum and the School and the Society, he writes, from the standpoint of the child, the greatest waste in the school comes from his inability to utilize the experiences he gets outside the school in any complete and free way within the school itself. While on the other hand, he is unable to apply in daily life what he is learning in the school. That is the isolation of the school and its isolation from life. Only if you teach Newton's laws and if you do not tell the student what this law means to you and where you can apply and what are the things where they haven't already applied, then you will just muck up those laws and you will not find any correlation between what he is learning in the schools and what he is experiencing the site. However, there is another interesting commentary, but let me not. This is the handover of the control of education to the scientists, okay, and narrowing and abstraction of the discourse often puts science beyond the rim in the language of understanding of ordinary children and indeed ordinary. So there were lots of discussions on this issue, and finally by 1990, this is what got added, adding context in science. Say that one-dimensional approach is not sufficient. Content, it is important, but it has to be always supplemented by the context. And what is that context we are talking about is why of science. It is making science learning relevant, addressing students' belief. Why is it worth learning? How does it connect to the real world? Connectivity, how science is connected to everyday life. Importance of science, science, technology in the development of the society also should come to education and application of science. How to apply the principles and generalizations learned in the classroom to the real life situation. And this training has to happen right from this. Now you can see that the objective of science is not only to produce scientists. If I want to produce, let's say, entrepreneurs or somebody who has a startup, what he has to understand is this context in which he can apply. And therefore, this context, if you not provide, is going to be one dimension. Incidentally, what happened in the Indian education system was after 1945, we integrated that one-dimensional aspect of education into our systems. So we started revising our syllabi without providing any context. And also in research, we said that, oh, we'll do basic research and then we will end up at some point of time in technology development. So these issues. However, the later discussion which happened in science, technology, and sciences, we literally ignored it. This is a two-dimensional approach for education. And while this approach was proposed and implemented in the United States, the scientific community also started talking about the same. That is, emphasis on application of science. Now, what they said was that if in science education, the content and context are inseparable, in the same way, in scientific research, the fundamental understanding and applications are inseparable. However, you cannot do that, and therefore came the model of the Pasteur's work by the Donald Lee Stokes, 1997. He wrote a book, but this idea started formulating late 80s. And I'll just explain to you what this plot means. That you ask the question, why do you do science? Well, science is either done for the fundamental understanding or it is done for some applications. And therefore, you draw two axes. The x-axis is application. So if your work does not have any application, then it is on the no side. If it is has application, it is on the yes side. Fundamental understanding, you put it on the y-axis, and if your work relates to some fundamental understanding, it is yes. Otherwise, it is no. It generates 4 quadrants, and each quadrant is named. For example, this quadrant where the fundamental understanding is yes, and there is no to application, it's called pure basic research. It's called focus part. Or for a simple reason, he wanted to understand why hydrogen spectrum is a line spectrum. He did not have any application in mind. Whereas by far, this is the most important quadrant. This is called the Pasteur. The Pasteur was one fellow who never worked on something which had no use. He wanted to know why milk gets spoiled, why chicken gets cholera, why pigs get some diseases, and why vinegar gets spoiled. And so all these investigations, he single-handedly developed the discipline of microbiology. So he did both the things at the same time, solving some societal problem. Along with that, came the fundamental. Well, there is this quadrant, second quadrant, is application, yes, there is no fundamental. And this is in the classical Indian language, we call it the jugaad. That you do something and get something working, like Edison wanted to make a bulb and he tried various materials, finally succeeded. So that's a jugaad basically. And there is another interesting corner at quadrant, which is called no part. There is no fundamental understanding and there is no applications. Ideally, such a quadrant should not exist in research, but it indeed exists at least in India. The reason is like this, that see, this is what a regulated education. When the student joins me, if I'm in a university, then I'm going to tell him that, look, as per the UGC requirement, you require one paper. So the whole objective is to produce one paper and not any application or fundamental understanding. And therefore, all that work which I'm doing with the student goes into that no part. At a senior level, I want promotion. In the university system, they have got academic point systems, this paper, that paper, that. So I'm all the time going to work on that. All that work will end up in no. So this is where the large amount of efforts in the Indian system. Whenever I visit various institutions, suppose if I talk on this, I simply ask the question that, what is the percentage of your research work that falls into this quadrant? And sleepishly people say 10% and 20%. And then finally, when they come to 50%, I said, yes, this is true for all of us. Nothing very special. That's the colossal price. So you can see here that education and science both brought in that context issue around 90s. And that context issue was forgotten in the Indian. And this is just to show you something which, see, the Pasha's quadrant has become such a divine thing in the education system. But that you see this press release from New York University in Pasha's quadrant. So everybody wants to place themselves in the Pasha's. And you can see here that maximum people should stay within this. They'll produce fundamental understanding and also some application. And that degree can vary. Suppose, for example, somebody is here, the application part is minimal, but you should have very high fundamental understanding. But it could be here, no problem. But large number of people, majority of them, should be placed here. So that is what these universities have been trying, and then you can see that being in Pasha's quadrant means foster innovation, to bridge the gap between basic and applied science, and look for the opportunities to move discoveries from the laboratories to the marketplace. This is what your technology center is. So this is what you say that we should be in the Pasha's quadrant. This work of Pasha's quadrant can be almost everybody. This is a nice article from our university. Research and relevance, implications of Pasha's quadrant programs, and faculty. So you want to give such a problem to the student that it has both the issues involved, that application. And the reason is that the student, after his PhD, can go out and if he wants, he can start his own business with it or his own startup. Also, the many things like the new world of discovery, invention, convergence of knowledge, technology, and society, and the plenty of articles. What is important here? That from 80s to 90s, what was achieved in the Western world, we missed out it. So what they did was, they got the convergence of science education with contents and context, and scientific research with the fundamental knowledge and application. Now, both the systems are now making one. And this is what has achieved great things. And this synergy in the education as well as in research is important for fostering this innovation, bridging the gap between basic and applied sciences, and realizing the land approach in the Indian. But somehow we never thought in these terms this trajectory of jobs, education, and scientific research, they're very divergent in 1992. And then what happened was in 1992 came the globalization. Now, this globalization was not merely the book adjustment, what a term that WTO and this, it was not simply that. It required a greater emphasis on organizing our science, technology, and education. But somehow we missed it. This is something which is extremely important. In this phase, every science leader has been saying that in this phase we need to make India as an international hub of innovations and convert it into a knowledge-based economy. What does it mean is that now the objective has totally changed. It is no longer nation development. The objective is socio-economic development, international competitiveness, converting research into products and processes, innovations, entrepreneurship, eventually leading to the growth of GDP and employment. And that international competitiveness was required because if my student is not getting the right education, then he is not going to stay in India, he'll go abroad. If a research laboratory requires an instrument, and if there is no Indian instrument as per its specification, he's going to buy an instrument from. Once I was attending a meeting in Delhi with some economists, and what they said was that in certain plan, I will not name it, then you will know the period. The total outlay of science and technology was 1,25,000 crores. Out of that 1,25,000 crores, 98,000 crores was for importing equipments, and some 30 odd crores was for building. So that guy asked that, look, we are putting money in science and technology so that our economic growth takes place. On the other hand, what you are doing, you are growing the economy of the other country by importing. Why is it happening? So this is what started happening. Unfortunately, we did not hear of it. And what today we are facing, all the problems are because of this. There's agricultural stress and all that people talk about, but people are not giving you the information that if my farmer produces sugar, he cannot dictate the price of sugar. Price of sugar is dictated by Brazil, who is the largest producer of sugar. The price of rice is dictated by Thailand and not by your. So this is a globalized world, and that we need to recognize. We didn't do that. Now, this is where we require that convergence of science, education, and society. And I think that around this time, every multinational company wanted some cheap labor from India, and this is the time when lots of these engineering colleges whose status is not more than a diploma institute started in this country so that we can get the engineering. Same thing happened for the sciences, and that is how it is. Now, since we did not do any of these adjustments in science, technology, education, then you can ask the question that after 20 years, what has happened? See, last year we were told that India is third in number of research publications. So I said, oh, that's a very good news. We are all proud of our scientists, which of course is me. However, I would like to know what is India's rank in other socio-economic indicators. So I prepared a list. In publications, we are 3. In patents, 7. Innovation Index 48, Quality of Life 59, Technology Advance 60, Health 112, GDP per capita 122, and Human Development Index 100. Now I said, oh, this seems interesting. Now, if we are third in publication, so let me see who are those countries, which are number 2 and number 4, and what are their achievements. The number 2 is United States, number 4 is Germany. And then you say, oh, very good, 2, 3, 15, 5, 37, 13, 15. Very good. France. And then you ask the question, which is the country which is number one in the world in publications? China, number one in publication, number one in patents, innovation index 14. Much better than what we have. Technological advance 38, GDP per capita 79, human development index 5. Now this comparison should tell us something, and that something is here, that there is a disconnect between our research and the social. So this, whereas in this particular countries, there is not much difference. I mean, whatever research they do, it finally, in some way or the other, fits the social economic. Now, this is that disconnect. Now, this you should sense from that theme of science day. What is the future of science, technology, and innovation, which will lead to jobs and this and that and education and all that? So what it is really calling us that this disconnect can be addressed. Now when we work in our laboratories or teach our students, we are totally insulated from the rest of the things happening in the world. But you must realize that the criticism has been mounting on us. This is what Narayan Murthy in 2015 he said in IISc Bangalore. Is there one invention, one technology, one idea produced by you that has helped make the society world better place? The right question. Well, there is a person called Prof. He's from North Carolina University. I was reading his interview. I like the title of this. Indians in tech have done great things. But has India benefited? So this is like asking, this report was 5 years ago, but this is like asking, hey, we are third in science and technology world ranking in publication. But our human development index is so poor, so Indians in tech have done great. People have started asking questions. Now, last year, I was reading there was a symposium on science, journalism, and communication, and he made it a direct attack. You see, this is Nagesh Patel, is a veteran science journalist. It is an irony that while our scientists can detect traces of methane on distant Mars, closer home we see people getting asphyxiated in manholes. It is the role of science communicators to point out such dichotomies to decision makers so that solutions for day-to-day problems of people could be developed and the benefit of research. See, now you see, this is the criticism which is coming. And we need to address that. And so addressing these issues again and come back to this, that we again will keep talking about this appropriate education, science, technology, and fostering innovation. We need to create new knowledge, so on and so forth. And in that context, now I will ask the next question. Do we think that these issues are beyond the purview of our science and technology endeavors? See, we can always argue that, oh, this is not our job, this is someone else's job, then we'll have to find out that some. But can we make a case that these issues are within the purview of our science and technology? So this is what I'm going to really start my presentation now here. I was reading Jeanine Michael, the University of Rouen, and he wrote a beautiful article, and I will request you to read this. The title itself is provocative. What science for what democracy? You're in a democracy. Are you doing science for that democracy? What science for what democracy? And so then he writes, is there on one hand an eternal science, more or less emphasized, and on the other hand, a democracy that has to administer that science with a view to improving it? So I do some science and I tell the democracy, look, this is the science I have done. Now, that democracy has to use my science to improve the society. It's a big question. And therefore, I ask the next question. That is what I like. one, or more fundamentally, should we not be thinking in terms of the co-evolution of science and society? Can they co-evolve? Okay, so that's the question that is extremely important, and therefore, if the science and the society has to co-evolve, then the research has to be managed. Now it comes that contextualization becomes important in this context. Now, this is an issue, this is a philosophical issue. And many of us will fight and say that science and technology cannot be contextualized. Something like the great chemist John Polanyi, he said that the Republic of Science is a society of researchers who can identify their own problems and solve according to their own judgment. Now, that's one way of looking at it. But when you ask for the contextualization, then you need to go away from that premise. Now, since it is a philosophical question, I have brought to you a statement from a philosopher, Lacy. Is science value-free? And what he said was that researcher must be impartial, but not neutral. Now, this statement has great meaning. The researcher has to be impartial. Impartial in the sense that suppose if I have laws of mechanics, quantum physics, or laws of chemistry, I'm not going to go to the people and ask them whether these laws are correct or not. I have to decide it based on my judgment and my impartiality. I don't want democracy does not mean I go to the people and say that how many of you believe in Newton's laws? No, you're not going to do that. But you cannot be. When it comes to the application of those laws, you cannot be indifferent. And I have brought exactly what he said, that being involved in the interaction with science and society does not mean being aware of or involved with the application of their research. This also covers the framework in which the objectives of the research project are defined. So it must get involved right at the beginning of the premises. And this becomes extremely important contextual when the inspiration for research is external, as it happens. There is very little inspiration that we derive from our own internal problems. We largely derive from external. And this is not what I am saying today. Dr. Radhakrishnan, the first Education Commission report was Dr. Radhakrishnan committee report. And there he said that the center of gravity of research of India always lies outside India. And we need to find out. So this is exactly what I have put in a different sense, that the inspiration of research is external and not. Now, just to drive this point, I'll bring some examples. This is a famous phrase in physics, the Cold War and hot physics. This Cold War period it started after the Japanese War, and it involved all that Cold War, Sputnik, Vietnam War, Korean War, until 1970 period. And this Cold War was race for the technological race for militaries. So that is what Americans wanted to do. The whole idea was that if the Cold War breaks into half a war, then there must have so many trained physicists that they can run half a dozen Manhattan-like projects. So this is what was their idea. A lot of military money was pumped into university. So any university, any center we talk about, they will participate. You talk about the Fermi lab, or you talk about the jet propulsion lab, they are working basically on the weapons. And this is where they started working. The USA, the universities were involved in the military research with a huge research budget from the militaries. And there are high energy physics, high energy accelerators, weapons program, guided missiles, that. You'll be surprised that much of the fluid mechanics was developed as a part of the ocean transport study. directly, and evaluation of weapon systems. And this is the job in which university students and the professors were. It was a massive effort. There are two commentaries on this, and this is the most important one. David Geisler's Boom Bust and the World of Ideas, Enrollment Pressures. Now, why I have brought this to you is for this. The physics PhDs granted by US universities from 1900 to 2005. Unfortunately, we don't keep such data with us. They have the data, then physics. Now you can see here, this was that Cold War. That this was the period when large number of physicists were taken in the universities, and when the Cold War got over, 1980, the number of physics PhDs dropped. And then it again grows. This is another bubble. This is called the Star War bubble, Strategic Defense Initiative in Spain. And again it rose, and again it fell. So the systems, we don't keep such data with us, but this data tells you that if the research is not contextualized, this is what is going to happen. The universities are supposed to do something else. Their students need to do something else. If you ask them to do something else, then this is what is going to happen. And there is some statistics also available. In 1980s, when the Cold War got over, the physics PhD enrollment dropped by 47%, maths by 32%, chemistry by 30%, engineering by 30%. By that time, they produced so many physicists that the physicists were looking out for a job. So in 1968, the physicist jobs equals to the number of positions was close to 1. By 1971, 9 years before the end of the Cold War. This is what is the problem of the dynamics that is. And therefore, if you ask the question now that suppose this hot physics of the Cold War is planned in the Indian field, then what will happen? I mean, will my students find out jobs? Will they be settled somewhere? What they will be doing? This is a question. Right? So any issue needs to be contextualized in terms of your society, and therefore the decision that needs to be taken.
You don't have the data for Indian phases.
No. There's another thing that happened. Because in the Cold War period, so many physicists were taken up in universities. Many of them were Indians also. And when they came back to India, they started that Cold War hot physics in India. That's a separate issue, but we'll talk about it later. And we should know what has happened. But then there is Geisler is a very interesting commentary that up to from 1920 to 1959, the physics abstracts were doubling every 13 years. And then the Cold War hot physics started, the physics abstracts started doubling every 6 years. So many people doing work and all that. And then the system stabilized and the doubling came to be. But that this particular pressure of publication, we Indians have carried even today. Okay? That's now when I say contextualizing science and technology, we should say that, well, we have grand India-centric challenges. Can we address it? And addressing these challenges does not mean we require BSc Physics or BSc. You require much, much better science and technology than what we do in our research centers or research. Let me list some of them. Say even after 70 years of independence, we're still talking about drinking water. We're still talking about water management. We're still talking about environmental pollution. We're talking about regenerative and climate resilient agriculture, renewable energy, disaster management. Every time some disaster happens, then we still wake up and say, oh, we need to do some research. We don't have it. Industrial productivity in this country is abysmally low, but we don't bother about it. We don't want to improve it, and we still feel that we are going to double the GDP next. Issues specific to urbanization, every city has a problem of traffic. So I have been asking in engineering colleges, is traffic engineering not a science subject, engineering subject? What are you doing about it? The technologies for smart cities and villages, are we going to buy those technologies? Are we going to do it? The technologies for the smart cities and villages will require lots of sensors of different kinds. Are we going to produce them here? Then also the science-based entrepreneurship. I'm not using the terminology technology-based. Because today we say technology, then people say it's a digital technology, some e-commerce and all that. I'm not talking about that. We'll come to this. Artificial intelligence, big data sciences, we're talking in because our children get jobs in Amazon and Google and all that. But is there any work going on for the social sector? Affordable healthcare. I'm very happy that your center is doing some work in this direction. Affordable, very important issue. Waste management. You know, the Swachh Bharat, the only instrument that we are giving to our people is a broom, and with that we want to clean everything. It requires high-level technology, and we forget it. The biodiversity and natural products and education technology. Still have forgotten about this. That these are the opportunity areas. And remember one thing, that these are the areas where the large-scale employment can be generated. These are the areas where we should be looking at. But these issues require some inputs from science and technology, and then only it can be done. See, in the 90s and early 2000s, we were lucky to have so many IT jobs produced in the country, and therefore this issue got little dissipated. But today we don't have those. Those avenues will have to be generated from this. And these are the areas where the local entrepreneurship, local job creators, and when I say this, see, typically Indian outfit or startup, the average number of employees, the employees is 2 to 3. Whereas an American startup, that number is 50 to 20. 10 times more people are employed in this country because they're at a higher level than what we do. Now let me again come back to some issues in economics. I'll just wind it up soon. These are the neoclassical theories of economic growth. Initially it was by Solow, parallelly done by Swan and Paul Romer. Paul Romer got Nobel Prize in Economics in 2018, and Solow got it in 1980. Very important economics. This knowledge exists with our economics friends. But they never told the scientists or engineers about it. See, this is what we remain compartmentalized. So finally, at some point of time, I said, let me learn about this economics. And then I am going to present it to you in just 2 slides. Okay, what it shows is that these fellows, they put the technological progress in economic development. What is its role? So that is, it's a mathematical models, but I'm not going to touch any math. Okay. See, you start with this premises that on the y-axis is a capital per worker, and on the y-axis is output per worker. This is like GDP per capita. So how much you invest and how much you get out of it. And this, suppose you have an industry, then if you start putting up the capital, initially your output per worker will grow, but at some point of time it is going to get saturated. So let's say beyond this point, if you infuse capital, then the returns are going to be minimal. And in the terms of economics, it is said that a rise in capital accumulation and exports will increase the economic growth rate, but only temporarily because of the diminishing returns. Now, this is exactly what I have been talking earlier in the 4th or 5th slide, that the Indian industry have become capital intensive. That is, already we are somewhere, those industries are somewhere here. And therefore, if they start putting more capital, then there is hardly anything will be realized as a profit. And therefore, the tendency is to reduce the number of workers so that your output per worker increases. And that's how the number of jobs will be decreasing if you follow this curve. So this is normally what is observed. Whereas Solo introduced a concept called the technical change. And what he says is that once the steady state of economy is reached, once you are on the plateau there, the economic growth can be increased only through innovations and improvements. And that is what we call as the technical change. So the solo song recipe for a long-term economic growth of a country is like this. On this side, you plot GDP per capita or GDP per worker, and this is capital per worker. So you start from somewhere, you start introducing capital, and then anyway you're going to get saturated. Once you attain somewhere near saturation, then there has to be a technical change. And that technical change, that is that innovation, it will put you in the higher orbit. And then if you start putting more capital, it will also, your GDP per worker will increase. And then, but it will also again saturate, and again you require another technical change, another innovation system, so that you can keep growing. So overall, this is the way your GDP is grow. So for a GDP, your GDP is. That is what is the technical change. And this particular concept was proven for American economy from 1901 to 1951. It was proven for China, South Korea, and all that. Nobody ever told this, that this is what happens. Now, if you want to see that the change in the GDP due to innovation, you can compare this China GDP growth and India GDP growth. This is the way China has grown after 1992. That is where the innovation. We have not done that, and we are lagging. What is that technical change? Well, this has been specified. Discovery of new materials, new processes, the product. So I keep telling my undergraduate physicists, I'm sorry, there are so many of them. Look, the research in materials is because of the solo song model. They think that the industries require new materials, new processes, new products, upward shift in the production through technology, innovation, technical inputs, progress in input, substitution of limitational inputs by new materials and technology, lowering of input-output ratio to innovations, improvement in the management structure is also okay. Now, the question that we should be asking is, can India experience the effect of technical change, which it has not seen so far? Now, when I give this talks, I give only on the solo song model, then people say that, oh, can you give us some examples? But you see, I don't want to talk about what I keep doing, but there is one interesting example that I will give. And you will see that how scientists can bring in that technique. I was visiting somewhere in Visakhapatnam. There are lots of quartz mines. And out of my interest, I went there and see what is happening. There, I got this data that if you take natural quartz, Indian natural quartz, 99.5 pure, and per unit price is $30. But if the quartz is 99.997%, the international prices are quite high. What the miners in India were doing until this time, my visit, I should say, they were over mining and selling the quartz in the international market. So I said, fine, you give me some quartz. You get it analyzed in the laboratory. What does it contain? It contains nothing. It contains aluminum, calcium, copper, iron, potassium, lithium, magnesium. We call the chemist and say that, look, these are the impurities. Can you find out a simple method of eliminating this? But it should work at tons of levels. He said, oh, what's up that? And then they proposed a method that implemented, and that places people started implementing that. It's a simple method where these elements, you see, they are very benign elements in that sense. So after a year, an executive of that company wrote me this letter. My company was exporting tons of cars and earning lakhs of rupees. Now it is exporting kilograms of high purity cars and earning crores. This is that technical change. technical change is nothing big. You don't require anything. Just small thing what you introduce, which changes the basic. And such things we need to do in the academic because we are holding all the knowledge, and therefore we can do that. Now, this example might look very trivial, but I'll give you another interesting example. Since India is number one in diamond export. Basically, we import diamonds and then polish them, and then we sell. It's a major foreign exchange here. However, because of the stiff competition from Chinese and Russians, the margins are very small. So I was visiting some diamond industry, wanted to know how do they polish and all that. So there they posed this problem to me, that while cutting those diamond, they use that lasers, they produce the diamond vest. Only clear part of the diamond is taken for polishing. The rest of the thing is diamond vest. And this diamond vest is then sold to polishing paper company. So to get those polishing papers, this diamond powder is used. Now, the industry people tell you that, sir, when that diamond we got, we need to polish it. For that polishing, we import diamond powder. Now you see the situation. You import diamond powder and polish your diamonds, and this diamond vest goes at a throwaway price. So we said, can we look at this prospect of converting your diamond vest into a diamond polish of the same specification as that? Now, many of you will recognize this is not a simple job because this is top to bottom nanotech. This is the only industrial application of nanotechnology in India. Okay, so you can do the chemical cleaning and also produce chemically processed diamond, and then you introduce some techniques and produce the diamond. And that has to have the same your particle sizes and all that. Otherwise, if you polish with an ordinary diamond powder, it will create scratches on the diamond. So that guy will lose his money. With this powder, these diamonds were polished by that industry. They were very happy. Well, I can tell you, this diamond is 60 lakhs. This is around 65, 70. That's the kind of expensive things they tried with they're ready to do that. And finally, it was put into theirs. Well, I can tell you, this is a Mrs. Hari Krishna diamond export. So they have taken this. And now, really in the diamond industry, they need to cut corners, and this helps them to cut corners. So this is where I come to the question of industry, academia, collaboration. This is how fruitful this turn out to be. I will not spend time, but there is something I should bring it to you from the preamble of Made in China 2000. Just like us, they also made that policy. Industrial policy was 2015, and the preamble states the following. I like that statement, therefore I have brought it to you. Since the beginning of industrial civilization, it has been proven repeatedly by the rise and fall of world powers that without strong manufacturing, there is no national fact. Oh, look, and we have forgotten this. We said that, 60% is 70% is services oriented. We are happy, but we need. So in 2015, what China did was, among many other areas, they took Industry 4 technologies as the first area, started interacting with academia. What has happened today is that today China is the force in Industry 4 technology. At the same time, if you look at the publications in artificial intelligence learning, In 2020, China boasts 3 universities in top 10. This is the difference that both the systems are going to be in the situation that both industry and I must also tell you that with the industry, even Indian industries are holding too much of data on materials, the processes, and everything. If you want to catch hold of that data, you will have to collaborate with them. Otherwise, you will be working on some hypothetical problem. And today, industry knows this. In in the United States, the faculty have started joining the corporates for the very same reason that they get an access to the data. So that now let me spend some time, but this is important. This country, last 15 years we have been talking innovation. Somebody has to define what is innovation. And I was looking for all these definitions, and finally I found the definition given by Barcelona is an appropriate. What he says is that innovation consists of 3 parts. The first part is you have to recognize the problem, and that requires innovation. Now, if I have not taught my student the content and concepts, my student will hardly recognize any problem. See, the training should be such that if my student is walking on the street and if he sees a lot of dirt piled up in the corner of the street, then we should feel that my opportunity starts from here. We should not blame municipal corporation. We should look at it as an opportunity. Unfortunately, that does not happen. The second part is you have to come up with a solution, which is partly analytical and partly creative. And the third one is the implement. You must see it in 3 dimensions. There is no point in just putting in this is 1 dimension, this is 2 dimensions, and this is 3 dimensions. And that's the biggest part of it. Unfortunately, our Indian education system, they are not helping our students to innovate. That's a big problem. The reason is that they are not exposing to a number of problems. They will be exposed. Suppose somebody is working with me in optics and I'm going to tell him something about optics. And but are we exposing them to the larger world? And wherever in India this exposure to the larger world has happened, the innovations have taken place there. I'll show you some examples. This is Hyderabad farmer Chintala Vigard. He has found this vitamin D in this rice and wheat variety. You know this guy, Karnataka Sugandiranjan Karagi. He is the founder of Nirmal Water Filters, world's cheapest potable water filter. He is a student from Rajasthan. Has developed the eco-friendly water retention polymer for the farmers in Rajasthan, and he is the founder of this. This is a simple problem. The Sijai, he was watching on the street that this coconut, those people who peel coconuts, putting a lot of efforts. They thought they'll make machine for them. Now, what is the commonality between all these 4? It is that they are challenged by something which they see in the society and they want to find out some way out. The innovation begins there. They identify the problems. Unfortunately, in our academic world, we don't make students see the world so that they can identify several of these problems. Last year, I have been also producing lots of entrepreneurs, by the way. Last year on 28th February Science Day, there was an article in Economics Times. Can coronavirus crisis change Indian science for good? And there were 10 achievers, the entrepreneurs, startups who started, and one of them is the person on the way, my former colleague in DRC. We encouraged her to leave and go for her startup. And last month she got an award from Bank for innovation. This is another issue which I would appeal to all the scientists and researchers, and that is We know that Professor Raman built spectrometer. He did not buy Raman's spectrometer, and he got his Nobel Prize. And this particular tradition of building equipments was there until 1990 in this country. Many of you must have seen this India's first electron microscope built across the road at SIMP by NN Das. And closer home, for me, when I was in DRC, I made this case study. The case study was a gas probe. It's a very simple equipment. This was developed 68 to 71, nothing 3 years they developed it. And then the technology was transferred to Toshniwal Brothers. About 150 gas chromatography units were produced and sold across the country. Then by 96, they came up with the advanced model with the PC based. However, post-liberalization, all this indigenous technology, indigenous instrument, this particular tradition came. This is where the India should have enhanced its efforts in building those equipment, consolidating our footprint in the world. But when this was required, left and right we started putting. Now this is something which I have not understood. The reason is that the history of science tells us that if you want to win a Nobel Prize, an experiment, you need to build your own equipment. Because commercial equipment, you cannot get a Nobel Prize. Commercial equipment is for something which is already known. It's for the incremental research. And then you keep giving research over Charlestown, civil nether, or this super resolution microscopy. We don't realize that the commercial equipment is for incremental research. It's not for some testing pioneering idea. For this, either you have to build your equipment or modify the existing equipment, get the data. Unfortunately, we forgot and we claim that we'll just do the data accumulation and get it, right? It's not going to happen. Other thing is development of equipment leads to the skill development for our students. When I go for PhD Viva OC, I hear the student for 40 minutes and then I ask, did you develop anything during this process of the PhD? Or you were just using ready-made equipment? And most of the time, the students have used ready-made equipment and got the data. He has not developed any skill. And that skill can come only when he develops a small experimental setup, small instrument. And second thing is that it has a great economic benefit that you can commercialize it and you can do that. This is the aspect of not industry. See, when I wanted to buy a single mode diode freezer, that was in 1997, I should tell you this story that Heinz had developed intracavity frequency double diode laser sometime in 1984. He used it for lamp shift measurement in highly ionized species. Worked till 1990. And in 1990, he sold that technology to Sapphire Lasers, German company, in Topeka. They started mass producing. By that time, this guy shifted to optical comb. And in 2006, he got his Nobel Prize. That Topeka laser I was the first person to buy it in India. But by that time, whatever could be done with that laser was ready. No new work could be done, only an incremental work that is what comes to it. And story of lasers has told us that those who understood these dynamics of science and business. The lasers were invented in 1960, and today laser is a multi-billion-dollar industry. In 1928, Raman developed the first Raman spectrometer, and in 1960, the lasers entered into the Raman spectroscopy, and laser Raman spectrometers, simulator Raman spectrometer, cars, micro Raman, all this development started. But in India, we never thought it is intellectual enough to develop this. So the land of government did not participate in development, and today there is a domestic $20 billion industry, and every razor domestic government have in India is important. This is something which should tell us that this is something which I have been also talking to the professors of physics in various. Do you read physics today? Do you read physics today is very common to read. You talk about all that gravitational wave, fine, very good. But physics today also carries articles on entrepreneurship for physicists, things your advisor told you, entrepreneurship for education, physicists as entrepreneurs. We never tell these things to our students. We always wanted to give them that intellectual thing, whereas the practicality. And there is a very important thing that the physicists, entrepreneurs, say 91 startups were surveyed. And where is that entrepreneurship lying? And that is where I was talking to the students. Electronics, components, medical devices, instrument systems, all of them, these are filled by physicists, not by engineering. And this is where the physicists have an upper hand. They understand the basic concept, and they also know the electronics. Do that, and then of course biotechnology, contract. So this is something which we need to. Now, I'll just take a couple of minutes more. This issue is close to my heart, and I do waste my time in this. You see, there are two pictures here. One is from, these are from potters. This potter is from South Korea. And this potter is from. Now, the difference, if we can start talking from the difference here. Look at this fellow's wheel. It is all electric operated. It has got all controls and everything. With that, it brings out the finest of the piece. What is the technology which is used by the potter in India? This is what they use. This is 1,000-year-old. See, the wheel, and you put a stick in it and rotate it. It does not have that accuracy, and there is also a precision there. And with that, that guy comes up with the food. So what you recognize is that there is no technological inputs has gone, and that is also reflected in the living styles. Now we need to ask this question: that if this profession is not respected, then the children of this fellow are going to enter into the job. They are going to leave this. All the traditional art forms will be lost. And every year, 10 lakh Indians are entering into the job market. So one more will get added. Instead of that, can we do something different? And I was doing some surveys, and this slide is based on that. The traditional knowledge and skill in India, this forms a part of the unorganized economy. But the most important thing is that the manufacturing in the unorganized sector is 20% of the total manufacturing that we do in India, and it employs 80% of the manufacturing work. Then I made a proposal that suppose these fellows don't have any. See, we are saying that we'll give science technology to private sector and this sector. Suppose if you make a proposal that I'm going to help them with a little bit of the science and technology inputs, and if I can improve their efficiency by 25%, then the Indian economy as a whole will gain 1%. That's a huge gain for them. How do we do that? But this is very challenging area to tell scientists today that look, can you help that potter in coming up with a better product? And say, oh, what nonsense are you? So that's the problem. Okay. That's because we have failed to understand this particular dynamics of what science technology plays in the economy. Let me just give a little bit of universities and local communities. You are a research sector, however, you are also connected with the other program. There's a person called Thomas Bender, a famous book, The University and the Sea. And he makes a very interesting statement. Traditionally, universities have been seen as in rather than offer locality. Universities have always claimed the world, not its host cities as their domains. Mumbai University will work for the whole world and not for the city of Mumbai. Calcutta University will work for the whole world, but not for the city of Calcutta. So, what is this dilemma? That's a question that Thomas Bender has been asking. But today, the new world view is that universities cannot be sustainable without being social responsible. And what is the social responsibility of universities is also defined by, say, Manchester University. The way the university makes a difference to the social and economic well-being of communities, education, research, and public. Can we improve their life by science and technology? That's the research. And the Leicester University have a program called PROUD, promoting health and well-being, restoring environment, opening access, culture and heritage, upskilling for the 21st century, and developing children and young people. There is also university social responsibility involved. And therefore, in the universities, we need to ask, so can our universities provide that science and technology to the local communities to enhance their productivity and to expand? And one of our students will get into an entrepreneurial role in this interaction. This is a great service that we can do. And the kind of science and technology required is very, very elementary, I must say. I can give you one example that there was a farmer in Kolhapur. Like other farmers, he was also trying to make jaggery, but his jaggery used to come out sticky. So he was getting very low price. So he used to curse his fate. So one day some of us were visiting that place and narrated the story. He said, fine, तुम्हारा अच्छा नहीं आता है ना, तो तुम्हारा थोड़ा सा गुड़ दे दो, और किसका अच्छा आता है, तो that farmer's गुड़ comes अच्छा, तो उसका भी थोड़ा दे दो. It is small job. You take this to your laboratory, ask somebody, इसमें क्या क्या है देखो. It turned out to be that the fellow who was getting a good jaggery, in his jaggery the calcium percentage was high, whereas this guy's the calcium percentage was very low. So we called him and said that थोड़ा सा चूना डाल के देखो क्या. And over 1 month, just standardize kitna chuna dalne ka hai. And his jaggery started coming well, and it started. Doesn't require quantum physics, does not require electromagnetic, doesn't require anything. But then you have pleasure, you have helped somebody with whatever you have learned. So that's an important thing. And finally, I will come to this particular issue, the skill education. Our education system does a great job of getting students prepared for more education. If the aim of primary school is to prepare a student for secondary school, aim of secondary school is to prepare a student for college, aim of college is to prepare a student for a master or PhD, and when he gets his PhD, he starts looking at what do I do now. This is the problem with our education. We do not prepare our students to go out and deal with real life. Can we teach them? They have missed it in the primary school, secondary school. Can we do it in the past? Now, I started this presentation with the skills, how it was not there in the British education. It is still not there. It appeared twice in the discussion. So it was not that the local, the Indians were aware of this. The kind of English education that was imparted does not make us worthy of earning our life. Those who can end up in government jobs, they can earn some money. What about others who do not get a government job? What about them? So first time the Hunter Commission 1882, this person from Maharashtra, he said that in the course of studies you include agriculture, lessons on moral study, duties and sanitation, technical education, and some useful arts, pottery or something like that. in the course of instruction. Develop a small model farm near a school where practical instructions can be given. If the person gets an education up to 7th standard and does not get a job, then how does he help himself? He should have some skill education. That was the idea. But the British education system did not look at this. Nothing was done until 1937. 1937 was the charter. India was to become independent. What sort of education we should have in the free India? That was the Varda Conclave of 1936. And based on that, came the charter. I found this report very interesting. However, this report was poo-pooed by all intellectuals. And I'll say that way I'll just bring a very small portion of the report. What I have just taken out a piece of that. They propose that from 1st to 7th standard, the school will run only for 5 hours and 30 minutes per day. Out of which, basic craft will be 3 hours and 20 minutes. More than half you should spend on the skill level. Now, they had a very simple idea that the students can pursue these skills as occupations after finishing football. And the modernists said that, oh, what are you teaching? This spinning, weaving, and pottery and all that. Look, oh, no, this is not what I was doing. And this report was done. But this contains a very important issue. If you need to do science and technology in a really big way, you require scientists and technologists who have brain, eye, and hand coordination. Without that, you cannot. What is that spinning and carpentry teaches you at that age is that brain, hand, and eye coordination. You can replace, if you don't like carpentry, you can replace it by computers and IT and all that, but start that skill education right now. Unfortunately, we didn't do that, and we are in the dilemma today that what do? We have got the skillless, and this dilemma is ever existing. Whether we should have knowledge or the skill. And then again, like that fastest quadrant, I keep telling the education is look, on the y-axis I am putting knowledge, yes or no. X-axis I am putting the skill. In that case, this is only a theoretical knowledge, theoretical education. This is no education. This is only skill based. And what we need is this skill and knowledge together. And there is a Chinese proverb, knowledge without skill is incomplete. Skill without knowledge cannot proceed further. So without that right combination, we cannot do it. And unfortunately, this issue has been lost. And finally, I will say that, well, these people have been arguing again and again, what is the role of science and technology in the human development? We just list out a few things which I said, improving understanding of threats and possibilities, delivering advances in technology to drive economic growth via new products, services, reduce costs and increase productivity, reducing resource use and environmental impacts, managing the competition for land, soil, water, and primary productivity, mastering the energy economy environment dilemma. If you don't do that, then there are going to go creating jobs and professions, meeting the needs of the poor, eradicating poverty and hunger, and improving health. This is what holistically we think. And this is, I believe, is the subtle message that has been given. Unfortunately, it has been largely unnoticed. So I'll end this with Thomas Jefferson's famous statement, main objective of science is freedom and happiness of man. Therefore, I will extend it by saying, main objective of advanced science is advanced freedom and happiness. If we can do that, then we can say that we have done our job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jagatap, for a really thought-provoking lecture. Really inspiring. I am sure that probably your 10 years of research are embedded in this lecture. So you have almost continued for 2 hours after sitting through the whole day, governing body meeting. This is an enormous thing. Definitely. So of course he has to leave for the airport soon, but maybe few questions.
I can.
Three, four questions. Started with somebody doing the production.
Sir, thank you very much for this very interesting and informative lecture. But sir, one thing that I want to ask you regarding that STIP 2020. In the STIP 2020, whatever they said that for Indian context, diversity is the strength. And what they proposed that 15,000 stakeholders over there to get because they are coming from a different corner of the society and everything. But whatever they proposed that convergence or a common thing, a common policy has to be made, including that 15,000 stakeholders. So my point is that is it really feasible to consider a convergence of 15,000 stakeholders?
Yeah, I mean, see, let me take the limited example in science and tech. See, in West Bengal, there is certain kind of handicraft. Nice cotton sarees, right? If you go to Indore, there are Indori sarees and Maheshwari sarees. You go to Kanchipuram, there are Kanchipuram. Now, they are different in terms of their. So if you start looking at the technology that they use for production of this, whether it is Kanchipuram and whether it is West Bengal or whether it is any other place, this is 500-year-old technology. Now, suppose if I need to give some technological inputs, I don't need to give for everybody. It's just going to be common. Just like a potter, I need to give him a technology. The same technology will work for almost all. What is going to be different is depending on the soil that he is using or mud that he is using for his pottery, allow to give him different compressing. So the bubble formation happens in the mud, then it cannot. But that's all going to be some parameters that are going to be basic technology. So what is seen as that we do not need to work on hundreds of different things, at least in this thing. We need to concentrate on 10, 15, 20, and then it can be multiplied. The same thing will happen. For example, 8 years ago, I was interested in the wastewater management. And I did my study, my home, and realized that biochemical process is much better. That is what we should do. So I asked my biology friend to do some data, and then we were trying to go for it. Every time people started asking that, in America they do 1 billion meters to 10 billion liters. How many meter cubes are you? 2. So I said, my idea is at first I will do 25,000 liters per day. Oh, no, this is not going to work. We require big. The mental talk in India, because we want to copy America. So one day I was visiting Varanasi and I took photographs and went to the same body and he said that, look, you want to clean Ganga, isn't it? Now these are the photographs of Varanasi. You don't have a sewage system. All that 1 trillion meter cube and all that envisages that you have a sewage system. Everything will be centrally collected and it will be processed and all that. It is not going to happen in India in any city. Take it. So instead of that, can I not go for a distributed solution which will work better in India? I am living in an apartment complex and total wastewater generated 25,000 liters per day. So that's the maximum capacity I will give and cost effective I give. And the water which will be purified, produced, they can use for gardening and they can use it in the flush tanks and all that. The problem is solved. Unfortunately, we have in our bureaucracy as well as in the scientific community something what is big thing. What do we need are the simple things and which we can. Then came certain technologies like electron beam technologies. Right? People were trying to implement them, see where are it being done? Oh, they are done in Australia. In Australia, you know what is the cost of electricity? It's not as much as you have in India. Electron and chalana hai. You don't understand. Finally, at the end of the day, I came to the conclusion: if we need to solve Indian problems, we need to have the Indian mindset, and we need to solve our problems our own way. We cannot take American education pattern and adopt it in India, British education pattern. Can we not think about a pattern which is suitable for this? Unfortunately, it does not. All our problems are because of this.
Sir, I have several queries, but I don't want
to. I'll come again and
but one quick clarification. So, what is the scope for this science like research on the STIP 2020?
Yes,
because everything is like a socially linked something. So, what is the scope for the open-ended research?
No, I'm not saying open-ended. See, I don't know how many of you you must be moving in a very elite scientific circle, so you do not notice this. Sometimes I help some universities. Just about 15 days back, one university wanted me to. They have this research recognition for the college. So they went me a German. I said, okay, I'll help you. They start looking at their research. Where are the papers being published? Published from a journal which published from Morocco, South Africa, Nepal. Can you expect a physics paper in Nepalese journal of physics? And they show that as an international publication, this is what. And UGC also accepts some of those journals as yes. And that's how the science is. Now you can ask another question back. Why do I expect that person to publish it? Why should I? You are at SN Bose Center, I am at IIT, somebody is at IISc. We may be publishing paper. Why do you insist that fellow should publish paper on nanotechnology? And let him do something which is relevant to his. That is where the university's field should be rooted in the ground, because their students are going to look for the employment opportunity, not your students or my students. They are going to look for the local entrepreneurship. Whereas what we are doing is we are converting them into our way of doing, which they cannot do, and their students cannot. Why are we doing this? Last week I was at VRC. I told them your VRNS projects. What are you doing? You are giving VRNS project to some college fellow and you expect him to develop nuclear fuels. Do you not have enough people? Why are you converting him into nuclear fuels? Whereas if he comes up with some problem like Guargam, tell you that Guargam problem, then you should support, give him support, and whatever technology comes, you take half the credit for it. This Guargam is a very important thing, you know. Government of India also started looking into it, but they never succeeded, and the university systems have never looked at it. See, 10 years ago, this Gawar, you know, this prices suddenly showed. The gum which is extracted from Gawar is used for the shell oil extraction. So the Chinese and Americans started buying in bulk tons of money. I think we make about $1 billion every year by selling Gawar gum. But if you can make Gawar gum, you will earn $10 billion. So somebody has to put in mind to extract the Gawar gum from the Gawar. Now what we have done, that Jaipur University fellow, There the Goa, I am taking example because that area produces large amount of Goa. We are converting him into space technology, nuclear technology, nanotechnology. He's forgetting his problems. Yeah. And the problems at the ground level, we do not know. So this is the kind of structure we have made. And therefore, the convergence should happen in the spirit and not in terms of this, that why everybody should do nanotechnology or engineering. So many things, there are many, many wonderful things. I did not mention, but when I spoke about the Cold War and hot physics, there are certain things which happened during that in the United States. You know, there's MIT, this John Slater. He was ranking numbers for the electronic industry. You know, this is over the world. And Los Alamos laboratories, they were energy. And the Los Alamos coined a term. They never said it is solid state physics. They said squalid state physics. In English, squalid means dilapidated, rusty, you know. You know, there's discipline-wise hierarchy got set up during that Cold War. Faithfully, it came in India. Now, I am saying that is that at that time in India, the spectroscopies were doing pretty well, but they became the squalid. And slowly those efforts were dissipated. Now I am saying that the spectroscopy is revived at your center. We didn't hear that. But then, when I joined research, there were people who were working on this aerosol physics. See, at that time, this soft matter was not there in the scene. So the statistical mechanics, statistical physics, stochastic processes, you work in this physics. And India was hosting literally hundreds of good people in the aerosol physics. They were decimated, I should tell you. They lost track. And now, when we have a Delhi situation, 2 PM 2.5, PM 10, you require now aerosol physics and they don't exist. See, this development of society requires every discipline. You cannot say this is at a higher level, this is at a lower level. But that hierarchy we brought in as a part of that thinking in this. It is very unfortunate. But we, as a scientific community, needs to take note of it. Last 4 years ago, I wanted somebody which I spoke to someone. The government of India was trying to put all the agricultural markets together through IT. So that time we were proposing that there should be a way that suppose you have got Himsagar mango here, I am a trader at Mumbai, I should be in a position to understand the quality of the mango produced on the field and decide its pricing and buy it from there. Without anything. What I required was literally the what does that mango contain? Basically, that is what is the fructose level, what is sucrose level, what are these? That's all I need. And that can very well be done using the diffuse reflectance spectroscopy. That and record it and send it to me, then I will know whether it is worth buying or not. And that was to integrate this whole market. That was the science. I looked around India, who could be the person who can help me to develop this?
He is doing that.
Yeah.
We are
So you should do that. You know, this is what is required today in that.
So after meal, he is exactly doing. We are collaborating.
So 4 years ago, I could not trace anybody. Then I dropped it. I said, "Hey, don't have people." So that is what should not happen. See the way we promote various disciplines is marketing. See this active converted
API.
APIs. Now we see the 40 years ago, the first choice for a chemist was to go for organic chemistry. And then he will learn all these syntheses and he will join some industry and all that. Over the years, nobody wants to join this. Nobody wants to join analytical chemistry, which is required by the industry. Now we want every chemist wants to do theoretical chemistry. That's in that change that has happened. And now we are talking about active pharmaceutical gradients and all that and all that. Government of India has listed chemicals worth 70,000 crores which we are importing, which should be substituted by the local product. Where are those chemists who are going to do that? This is the lopsided that has gone in for the last 20 years. Therefore, we need to now again redo the.
The new science policy take care of many of these things. We are not
See, the policy does talk about many things, but it does not give you examples like the examples.
Right.
But it talks about everything, science communication, and that is what I was also telling you. See, science communication is going to become an important issue, at least policy is that. And this is Bose. He was one of the earliest science communicators in regional language. Now, can we do something as a part of this center? So, in that case, we need to write to science and technology that we will mentor a program on Satyendranath Bose Forum for science communication. And we will go across the country. किसी को मलयालम में करना है, we'll support. किसी को बंगाली में करना है, हम support. Can we do that and help? And that is what we were saying, that communication, science communication, extremely important.
Quick information, sir. One of the biggest pharmaceutical industries is looking our director's time to make nano API formulation.
Yes.
And he's looking
a
time on Friday, 4 o'clock.
I'll tell you this.
I thought we were directors not giving time.
2000. Now this is the last story I'll tell you. 2013, the last policy came. People started working from 2001. And that time the government said that you go to the people and ask what science and technology you require. I was a member in Delhi. He said, fine, we go to the people. And in Delhi, we invited farmers and industry related to the farming. And everybody is supposed to present something. And then I still remember two very interesting stories there. One farmer, he didn't know much of English, but he came onto the stage and said, sir, I'll say in English what he said in broken English. Sir, I hear there is a lot of research going on in this country on nanotechnology. Sir, I am a farmer. Can you give me nano fertilizer? Which can be very effective for my farm. Second important problem I am facing is the pesticide residue. So can you give me nano pesticides so I can use very little? And none of the experts had any answer to this. And then he said, look, I am not interested to say that the nanotechnology will be used for medical and all that. I am not. Can you solve mine? Another farmer, equally interested, he said, sir, when I fall sick, I go to a dispensary or a hospital. Suppose my crop falls sick, can I go to a dispensary or a hospital? What it means is, can I take some leaves and go to some place and say, ye kya hai bolo? So he was thinking in terms of agri-clinics. A concept which is a beautiful concept. But people sitting in the air-conditioned rooms will never think of this. This is what has happened. That disconnect has developed.
Sir, we got a project from ICA on nano fertilizer and nano pesticide.
Good. You should
We got it.
you should take it forward. And that is what we make it. But don't sell it for a small price. Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah.
It's just because of curiosity. You showed a very nice, comparison with the publication ranking, patent. Then I found that although China is doing quite well in other sector, but in health and
Yes. In health.
life quality,
Yeah.
that is almost as bad as India.
Yeah. The reason for this is good that you observe that. See, as regards to quality of life, it is not only the material quality of life, but also the democratic values, whether the people are experiencing freedom or not. That also gets counted. So on that thing, China does not do that. As regards health, there are question marks about what you see in Beijing and all that is different from the interiors of China. This is what people speculate. Okay, I mean, COVID is one thing we have realized, but for the years, all these SARS type things have come out from China. So China's rank in these tops.
No, I was just thinking whether it's still a signature of a developing country. Because compared to that, both your Germany and other places, they are just doing fantastic.
See, I did not show you one thing. I mean, sorry, I thought I'll take this 1 minute. Here is this one comparison. I thought somebody will ask me this question. See, every time we say that the government of in India we spend 0.8% of and Americans spend 3%. But that 3% of the total GDP, and then you see how much is the contribution by governments. In Finland spends about 3.4% of its GDP on research and development, out of which 3.8% is by the government. In Japan, it is 15% by the government. China, it is 20%. USA, it is 23%. Germany, it is 27%. And in India, most of it comes from the government. That's what we expect. That DST should give us project, DBT should give us project. Why not an industry supports it? That's the question people are asking. It's a lopsided distribution. And this also has a counter table. Yeah, I should not show. But if you look at the PhDs and the jobs, then that also shows the same correlation that percentage researchers by the section of employment, then you find that in India, PhDs enter into either government jobs or education, and hardly anything goes in PhD. The recent figures. Whereas you see the figures for the other countries. So that tie-up they have, right from their PhD programs to end of the PhD program and transfer to the industrial jobs, which happens very soon. So these are some of the messages we need to take.
Okay, so I think it's a time to thank the chairman, Professor Jagatap. I mean, because he has to leave, and I think that we'll keep a lot of questions.
Oh yeah.
Will be asked.
Discussion.
So next visit, maybe we'll have a 2 days visit so that we can interact more with the faculty members. Of course, I'm sure that we need to meet the students also.
Yes.
some of the students may have joined online, but definitely you want
Yeah,
more interaction
he
with the
said
students
he
would be
wants to
extremely
give a
useful.
lecture.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this will be part of the research methodology course for the students
Yes,
probably.
yes.
Yeah, that will be very nice. And we thank you again, and obviously that for your appreciation. This
Oh,
is
yeah.
you for your lecture. This was that that was the special talk about 25 and a small memento carry to
Generous.
I think he has to take his.
And
Otherwise,
Professor, one picture has to be taken.
somebody took the picture. I don't know. One more time, sir. Thank you so much. So maybe put it.